We're overwhelmed by the challenge of true manhood. Boys who never grow into biblical manhood are extremely toxic. Men, we're not dogs. We don't react on instinct. You see, boys are obsessed with themselves. Men provide for others. Where are the men? I'm Gavin Wood, and this is Rooted Faith Network. And no, it's not a joke. I'm asking a serious question. Where are the men? In His Word, God calls us to rise up, to stand up. As Moses said to Joshua when Joshua stepped into the position of leadership of the people of God, be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you. We're overwhelmed, if we're honest, by the challenge of true manhood, biblical manhood. We don't feel equal to the task. We don't feel that we're worthy of such a high and holy calling. And all of that is absolutely true. We're not equal to the task. We're not worthy of such a high and holy calling. But that does not give us reason to back down, to run away, to hide, to shrink back from our responsibilities. Talking about masculinity and femininity from a biblical perspective these days is unpopular because the world, the secular world system, the ungodly values in which we live and by which we're surrounded, gives us a very skewed picture of what manhood and womanhood is. We've even come to the place where people talk about toxic masculinity. There's absolutely nothing toxic about masculinity. But boys who never grow into biblical manhood are extremely toxic. They're just overgrown boys. You might have heard the saying, the difference between men and boys is just the price of their toys. Well, that's not the difference between men and boys. That's the difference between little boys and little boys who haven't grown up, who are physically adults, but emotionally they're still children. They're still playing on Xboxes and PlayStations and Fortnite and all this garbage, but they never be able to fight a war. How often can they stand up for their families and they leave their wife, or even worse, their live-in concubine, their girlfriend, to do that work for them? We need to get back to an understanding of biblical manhood. It's no good we throw our ideas around or share opinions. That's how we got into this mess in the first place. So let's lay the groundwork for a biblical understanding of what manhood truly is. Manhood, defined in Scripture, as someone who walks humbly before their God. Micah 6, chapter 6, 6-8. What does the Lord our God require? To act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly before our God. Someone who's humble before God. God's not an afterthought. God's not an exclamation point on a sentence littered with foul verbiage and profanity. God is the creator and sustainer of the universe, the one in whom we live and move and have our being. So walk humbly before God. Secondly, biblical manhood is displayed in someone who has control of their urges, physical urges, sexual urges. Self-control is part of the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians chapter 5 from verse 22. Men, we're not dogs. We don't react on instinct. We can see a beautiful woman and admit that to God and thank God for His beautiful creation, but check your thoughts right there. Check your heart and your mind right there. So we've got to control our urges. We're not animals. We're not beasts. We've been created in the image of God, and sex is a beautiful gift from God to be celebrated within the boundaries, the safety, the security, the intimacy of marriage. Biblical manhood is also defined by someone who understands what it means to provide for their family. And that doesn't mean just physical, financial provision. This is emotional provision. So many children today, young boys, young girls, young men, young women, have such a weak image of fatherhood because their fathers are weak. The fathers are chasing the wrong goals. The ladder's against the wrong wall. They're climbing that ladder with all they can muster, but it's the wrong wall. Manhood is not about having big muscles or expensive cars or a fancy title or being in charge of the boardroom or having a massive bank balance or being on the cover of GQ or Men's Health. That's not manhood. Those are boys. You see, boys are obsessed with themselves. Men provide for others, specifically their families, their wives, and their children. That doesn't mean their wives and children are less than them in any way whatsoever. It's just all about biblical roles and responsibilities. So provision is not just physical. Men, we should be the thermostats in our homes. We should set the emotional temperature in our homes. Our wife and our kids are thermometers. They just tell us what the temperature is. They just accurately tell us what the temperature is, what emotional climate have we established in our homes. Don't blame them when it's too hot or too cold, when it's not a healthy environment for spiritual, emotional, physical growth and development. That's our responsibility. Check the temperature with your family, set the temperature by yourself before God. Nobody else is responsible for that. So it's a broad meaning of provision, a biblical meaning of provision. Biblical manhood is also about protection, protecting our families physically, emotionally, spiritually. That means we have to be there when stuff goes wrong. Maybe we have to take a sideways step at work because that promotion we so desperately want that'll get us a bigger boat or a bigger car or more toys is going to take us away from our family. And we cannot have quality time with our families without quantity time because we can't schedule those moments, those beautiful moments when our family opens the window into their soul, or even better, opens the doorway into their soul, and we can go in there and be present with them. So many men are physically absent and even worse, emotionally absent. That's not manhood. That's childish behavior. I'm going to say something that I've said many times from the pulpit in local churches, and I've never had a man challenge me on it. If you want to challenge me on it, you're most welcome. I look forward to having a conversation with you. But I'm convinced that the main reason, I know there's many, but the main reason men spend so much time at work and on the golf course and at this club or the bar is because they are terrified of the true responsibility that was required of them at home. I'm putting this out there. You can challenge me. I'd love to talk to you about it, but I've seen it over and over. And I've had a couple honest men come up to me and say, you are absolutely right. So let me hear your opinion on that. And another component of biblical manhood is that we serve our communities. We are out there in our communities with our families, participating in community activities, upholding the community, uplifting downtrodden communities, living as salt and light in a dark world, as scripture tells us. Man, this is what we're called to. This is what we're created for. And we must take responsibility for the fact that the world is broken. It's in a mess because all too often we failed in our primary responsibility, and that is the home. It's very interesting when Paul talks to young Timothy, a pastor, about biblical manhood and the qualities and characteristics of leadership. Paul uses the home as the testing ground for true maturity and manhood. Look at 1 Timothy 3, Titus chapter 1. Study the scriptures. David calls Solomon, his son, to be a man. Unfortunately, David wasn't the best example of manhood either. There's a lot of broken fathers in scripture, but Joshua, Caleb, godly men, Daniel, Nehemiah, amazing examples of manhood. Paul, Timothy, Tychicus, someone you've probably never heard of. Paul mentions him. He was basically the courier for Paul's letters to the churches in Asia Minor. Hardly ever mentioned, but he was faithful, loyal, hardworking, risked his life to get the word out to the local churches in an environment where persecution and death for worshiping Christ was very regular. And that happens today in the persecuted church, but biblical men take a stand. We don't take a stand of convenience. We're not looking for the profit or what works for us in a situation. And men, if you're married, don't forget Ephesians 5 says we must love our wives as Christ loves the church and gave himself up for her. Sacrificial love. If it kills us, we need to love in biblical ways. I hope you're as challenged as I am looking at scripture and looking at these characteristics. Let me know what you think. If you're mad at me, tell me. Man up and tell me. If you've been challenged, tell me. If you disagree on some points, tell me. Come on, men. Stand up. Let's be counted. Let's engage. Let's acknowledge our sin, our failure, confess that to God, and then rise up and be faithful men of God for the sake of our families, for the sake of our communities, our nations, and the world. Where are you, men?